My name is Delphine Rivera and I am 28 years old. Last week, my biological family showed up at my doorstep after 18 years of silence, begging for forgiveness and money. They need help paying for my brother's cancer treatment. The same brother they chose to keep while shipping me off to foster care when I was 10. The irony is delicious. They abandoned me when I needed them most, and now they expect me to save them when they need me most. But here is the thing about family loyalty. It goes both ways. Call to action. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below if you love stories about karma coming full circle and family drama that will make your jaw drop. Smash that like button and subscribe, because this journey gets absolutely insane. Trust me, you will not see this ending coming, and you definitely want to stick around to see how justice gets served ice cold. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. I was 10 years old when my parents sat my siblings and me down for what they called a family meeting. My mother, Patricia, had her arms wrapped protectively around my 8-year-old sister Melody, while my father, James, kept his hand on 12-year-old Marcus's shoulder. I sat alone on the opposite couch, sensing something terrible was about to happen, but having no idea just how devastating it would be. Delphine, my mother, began, her voice cold and detached. Your father and I have made a difficult decision. We are getting divorced and we cannot afford to support 3 children between 2 households. The words hit me like physical blows. I remember gripping the couch cushions so hard my knuckles turned white. My father cleared his throat and continued where my mother left off, as if they had rehearsed this cruel speech. Your mother will take Melody, and I will take Marcus. You are going to live with a nice foster family who can give you opportunities we cannot provide right now. The room spun around me. I looked at my siblings, expecting them to protest, to say this was wrong, to demand we stay together. Instead, Marcus stared at the floor while Melody buried her face in our mother's shoulder. Neither of them said a word in my defense. Why me? I whispered, tears already streaming down my face. Why am I the one who has to leave? My parents exchanged a look that I would not understand until years later. My mother's expression hardened even further as she delivered the final blow. Marcus is James's biological son from his first marriage, so naturally he belongs with his father. Melody is my baby, and she needs her mother during this difficult time. You are old enough to understand that sometimes families have to make hard choices. The subtext was clear even to my 10-year-old mind. I was the expendable one, the one they could sacrifice without losing sleep, the burden they could pass off to someone else while keeping the children who truly mattered to them. Within a week, I was packed up and shipped off to my first foster home. I remember standing in the driveway with my single suitcase, watching my father load Marcus's belongings into his truck, while my mother helped Melody arrange her stuffed animals in their new bedroom. They had already divided up my room, my space, my very existence, as if I had never been part of their family at all. The foster care system became my new reality. Over the next 8 years, I bounced between 7 different homes. Some families were kind but overwhelmed. Others saw me as nothing more than a monthly check from the state. A few were genuinely loving, but those placements never lasted long due to circumstances beyond anyone's control. I learned to pack light and guard my heart carefully. I threw myself into academics because grades were something no one could take away from me. While my biological siblings enjoyed family vacations and birthday parties, I studied in cramped bedrooms and wrote essays by flashlight when foster parents would not pay the electricity bill. The worst part was not the instability or even the occasional cruelty of strangers. The worst part was the complete silence from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. No birthday cards, no phone calls, no visits. It was as if Delphine Rivera had simply ceased to exist the moment they signed those papers. During my junior year of high school, I was placed with the Hendersons, an older couple whose own children had grown and moved away. Martha and Bob Henderson were not perfect, but they were consistent. They helped me apply for college scholarships and taught me practical life skills like managing money and cooking nutritious meals. When I aged out of the system at 18, the Hendersons offered to let me stay while I attended community college. For the first time since I was 10 years old, I felt like someone actually wanted me around. They celebrated when I transferred to a 4-year university. They attended my graduation when my biological parents did not even know I was getting a degree. I built a successful career in nonprofit management, specializing in programs for foster youth. The irony was not lost on me that I had turned my greatest trauma into my life's mission. I met my husband David through work. He was a social worker with the same passion for helping vulnerable kids. We created the loving, stable home I had always dreamed of having. For 18 years, I heard nothing from my biological family. No attempts at contact, no explanations, no apologies. I built an entire life without them, surrounded myself with chosen family who valued and respected me. I had made peace with their rejection and moved forward. Then last week, my carefully constructed world shifted when I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find my mother, father, Marcus, and Melody standing on my porch looking nervous and desperate. They were older, grayer, and clearly uncomfortable, but unmistakably the family who had discarded me like unwanted furniture. My mother spoke first, her voice shaky and uncertain. "Delphine, honey, we know this is unexpected, but we really need to talk to you about Marcus. He has been diagnosed with leukemia and the treatment costs are overwhelming. We were hoping that maybe since you have done so well for yourself, you might be able to help us figure out how to pay for his care." The audacity was breathtaking. After 18 years of treating me like I did not exist, they showed up asking for money. Not seeking forgiveness or offering explanations for their abandonment. Not expressing any interest in my life, my marriage, my accomplishments, or my well-being. Just a straightforward request for financial assistance from the child they had thrown away. Standing there looking at them, I felt a cold clarity wash over me. This was not a family reunion. This was a business transaction. They had come to collect on an investment they had never made, banking on blood ties they had severed decades ago through their own choices. I invited them inside, not out of warmth or nostalgia, but because I needed to understand the full scope of their desperation before deciding how to respond. They sat awkwardly in my living room, taking in the comfortable furniture, the family photos featuring David and me, with the Hendersons, the evidence of a life well lived, despite their abandonment. Marcus looked gaunt and tired, clearly suffering from his illness and treatment. Despite everything, seeing him sick stirred something in me, not because of blood relation, but because I genuinely did not wish suffering on anyone, even those who had hurt me. Melody fidgeted nervously, avoiding eye contact and looking like she would rather be anywhere else. My parents maintained forced smiles while scanning the room, clearly calculating my financial worth. "The doctors say Marcus needs aggressive treatment that our insurance will not fully cover." My father explained, his tone businesslike rather than emotional. "We have looked into loans, but our credit is not great, and the amounts we are talking about are substantial. We remembered that you always were the smart one, and we figured you probably did well for yourself." The casual way he referred to me as the smart one was telling. Even now, they were reducing me to a useful characteristic rather than acknowledging me as a full human being, deserving of love and respect. I was not their daughter who they had missed and wanted to reconnect with. I was a resource they hoped to exploit. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral and professional. "Around $200,000 for the full treatment protocol," my mother replied quickly, as if she had been waiting for this opening. "We know it sounds like a lot, but Marcus is still young and the doctors are optimistic about his chances if he can get the treatment he needs." I nodded thoughtfully, processing not just the astronomical sum but the entire dynamic playing out in front of me. They had rehearsed this pitch, probably spent days figuring out exactly what to say to maximize their chances of success. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed I would be the same, desperate for approval child they had abandoned. "Tell me," I said carefully, "how exactly did you find me? I changed my name when I got married, and I am not on social media under any name you would recognize." The question clearly caught them off guard. My parents exchanged nervous glances while Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Finally, Melody spoke up for the first time since arriving. "We hired a private investigator," she admitted quietly. "It took him 3 months to track you down through court records and employment databases." The revelation was both impressive and deeply disturbing. They had spent considerable time, effort, and money to locate me. Not out of love or genuine desire for reunion, but specifically because they needed cash. The private investigator alone probably cost several $1,000s money. They apparently had available for tracking down their discarded daughter, but claimed not to have for medical bills. "I see," I replied, filing away this crucial information. "And in all your research, what did you learn about my life over the past 18 years? Another uncomfortable silence stretched between us. My father cleared his throat and attempted an answer. "Well, we know you went to college and got married. You seem to have done really well for yourself, which is wonderful. We always knew you were capable of great things." The hypocrisy was staggering. They had abandoned me precisely because they claimed they could not provide opportunities, yet now they were taking credit for achievements they had actively hindered. More importantly, their research had been purely financial. They knew my approximate income and property values, but had made no effort to understand who I had become as a person. "Did you know that I spent my 18th birthday alone in a group home because my foster placement had fallen through?" I asked conversationally. "Or that I worked 3 jobs to pay for college while living in my car for 2 months between housing arrangements?" Their faces showed a mixture of discomfort and confusion. They had not expected to discuss the past, only to secure my cooperation for their immediate needs. "Delphine, we know those years were difficult," my mother said with forced sympathy, "but dwelling on the past will not help Marcus get better. We need to focus on moving forward as a family." The word family hung in the air like a bitter joke. I almost laughed at the transparent manipulation. They were attempting to invoke family loyalty from the child they had explicitly excluded from their family for nearly 2 decades. I stood up and walked to the window, giving myself a moment to think while they waited anxiously for my response. Outside, I could see David pulling into our driveway home from his afternoon shift at the children's hospital. The sight of my husband, my chosen family, crystallized my decision. "I have a proposition for you," I said, turning back to face them. "I will consider helping with Marcus's medical expenses, but first I want to understand exactly why you made the choices you did 18 years ago. Not the sanitized version you told me as a child, but the real reasons behind your decision to keep 2 children and discard the third." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. My parents looked genuinely panicked for the first time since arriving, while my siblings appeared confused about where this conversation was heading. "Delphine, that is ancient history," my father said quickly. "We made difficult decisions during a challenging time. What matters now is helping Marcus and moving forward together." "Actually, what matters now is the truth," I replied calmly. "You see, I have learned a few things about relationships and family over the years. Real families do not abandon children. Real families do not disappear for 18 years and then show up asking for money. Real families communicate even during difficult times." My mother's forced smile was wavering as she realized I was not going to be as easily manipulated as they had hoped. "If you want my help, you are going to answer every question I have about what really happened. You are going to explain your choices, take accountability for the damage you caused, and demonstrate genuine remorse for treating a child as disposable. Only then will we discuss any kind of financial assistance." I could see them calculating whether to accept my terms or try a different approach. The desperation in their eyes told me everything I needed to know about their other options. They had already exhausted every resource before swallowing their pride and tracking me down. "We will tell you whatever you want to know," my mother said finally, though her tone suggested she was agreeing to a hostage negotiation rather than a family conversation. That was when I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. They were about to learn that the discarded daughter they had underestimated was now holding all the cards in this twisted family reunion. David walked through the front door just as the tension in the living room reached its peak. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic. Suddenly, I was not alone facing my childhood demons but had my partner by my side. My biological family stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and calculation, clearly wondering if this new variable would help or hinder their cause. "Honey, these are the people I told you about," I said to David, watching their faces carefully as I emphasized the word people rather than family. They were just agreeing to answer some questions about the past. David nodded politely but kept his expression neutral. We had discussed this possibility many times over the years, what I would do if my biological family ever surfaced seeking reconciliation or assistance. He knew my history intimately and had helped me process the deep wounds their abandonment had created. More importantly, he understood that any interaction with them needed to be on my terms entirely. "Mom, Dad, Marcus, Melody. This is my husband David," I continued with deliberate formality. "David, these are my biological parents, Patricia and James, my half-brother Marcus, and my half-sister Melody." The emphasis on biological and half was intentional. I wanted to establish immediately that biology alone did not create family bonds, and that their genetic connection to me carried no special privileges or obligations. My father shifted uncomfortably at the terminology, while my mother attempted another forced smile. "It is wonderful to finally meet you, David. We have heard so many wonderful things about you and your marriage." "Actually," David replied calmly, "you have not heard anything about our marriage because you made no effort to be part of Delphine's life until you needed something from her. But please do not let me interrupt your conversation." The directness of his response clearly rattled them. They had expected to manipulate family dynamics and emotional guilt, but David had no emotional baggage clouding his judgment. He could see their behavior objectively and call it out without hesitation. "Why do not we start with something simple?" I suggested, settling back into my chair with David standing supportively behind me. "Marcus, what did Mom and Dad tell you about why I was not living with you anymore after the divorce?" Marcus glanced nervously between our parents before answering. "They said the custody arrangement was complicated and that you were living with another family who could provide better opportunities. They said it was temporary until things settled down." "Temporary," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. 18 years is quite a temporary arrangement. When exactly were you expecting this temporary situation to end? The question caught him off guard. It was clear that as a 12-year-old he had accepted our parents' explanation without questioning the logic or timeline. Now, as an adult, he was being forced to confront the absurdity of their story. "Melody," I continued, "what did Mom tell you about why your sister was not around anymore?" Melody squirmed in her seat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "She said you were happier with your new family and that trying to split time between houses would be too confusing and disruptive for everyone." "Happier?" I mused. Did she explain how she determined I was happier without ever speaking to me or checking on my well-being, or did she mean that everyone else was happier without me around? My mother finally spoke up, her voice sharp with defensive irritation. "Delphine, you are twisting our words and making this much more dramatic than it needs to be. We made the best decisions we could with limited resources during an incredibly difficult time." "Limited resources," I repeated thoughtfully. "Let us explore that. Dad, what was your annual income the year you shipped me off to foster care?" "I do not see how that is relevant to helping Marcus now," he replied evasively. "It is relevant because you claimed poverty as justification for abandoning your child. I want to understand exactly how poor you were and whether financial constraints were genuine or simply convenient excuses." David moved to the bookshelf and retrieved a folder I kept there. My personal research on my biological family that I had compiled over the years. I had never intended to confront them with this information, but I had needed to understand my own story for therapeutic purposes. "I took the liberty of researching your financial situation during those years," I said, opening the folder. "Tax records are public information if you know where to look, and I know where to look." The color drained from my father's face as he realized I had done my homework. My mother sat up straighter, clearly preparing for battle. "In the year you gave me away, your combined household income was $94,000. That was well above the median household income for our area at the time. Within 2 years, you had purchased a larger house, taken family vacations to Disney World, and enrolled Marcus in expensive private baseball leagues. I pulled out printed bank statements, court documents, and property records that painted a very different picture than the poverty story they had sold to justify their decision. Meanwhile, Melody, your mother bought you a horse for your 10th birthday. A horse? With boarding fees, training, and equipment that totaled nearly $15,000 that first year alone. Melody's face went white as she realized I knew about luxury purchases they had made while claiming they could not afford to keep me. The hypocrisy was laid bare in black and white documentation. So the question becomes, I continued calmly, if money was not actually the issue, what was the real reason you decided I was the expendable child? The silence stretched uncomfortably as my biological parents realized their carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. David squeezed my shoulder supportively, proud of how thoroughly I had prepared for this confrontation. There are more documents in here, I said, tapping the folder. Court records, social worker reports, even some very interesting communications between you and various family members discussing your decision. Should we continue exploring the truth? Or would you prefer to stick with your fiction about limited resources? My father looked defeated, while my mother's expression had shifted from fake sweetness to barely contained anger. They were not used to being challenged or held accountable, and certainly not by the child they had discarded. We made mistakes, my father said finally. We were young and overwhelmed, and we handled the situation poorly. But that does not change the fact that Marcus needs help now, and you are the only person in a position to provide it. Actually, David interjected, that is not true either. I did some research of my own after Delphine told me about your visit. Your family owns 3 properties, including a vacation cabin in Colorado that is worth approximately $400,000. You also have retirement accounts, investment portfolios, and other assets that could be liquidated to pay for medical treatment. The revelation that David had conducted his own investigation clearly shocked them. They had assumed they were dealing with one person, not a team of 2 intelligent adults who understood how to gather information and verify claims. You have the resources to handle this situation yourselves, I said matter-of-factly. What you are really asking for is to avoid the inconvenience and financial sacrifice required to take care of your own child. You want me to solve your problems so you do not have to disrupt your comfortable lifestyle. The truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. They had come seeking a bailout from the child they had thrown away, hoping that blood ties would override common sense and self-preservation. This conversation is far from over, I announced, standing up to signal that the immediate discussion was ending. David and I need to talk privately about everything we have learned today. I suggest you go home and think very carefully about whether you want to continue with honesty or keep trying to manipulate someone who clearly knows more about your situation than you anticipated. As they filed out the door looking considerably less confident than when they had arrived, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. The real confrontation was just beginning, and I was finally in control of the narrative. This time, the abandoned child was holding all the power. 3 days passed before my biological family contacted me again. During that time, David and I had several long conversations about how to handle the situation. We also reached out to Martha and Bob Henderson, who had become my true parental figures, for their perspective on the moral complexities of the choice I was facing. Martha's advice was particularly insightful. Honey, family is about who shows up consistently, not who shares your DNA. You do not owe these people anything, but you also do not want to become the kind of person who lets bitterness poison your own heart. Do whatever feels right to you, but make sure it comes from a place of strength, not pain. When my mother called to request another meeting, I agreed, but set strict conditions. They would come to my office during business hours, creating a professional rather than personal atmosphere. David would be present, along with my attorney friend Sarah Martinez, who specialized in family law and had volunteered to observe the proceedings. They arrived, looking nervous and defensive, clearly uncomfortable with the formal setting and additional witnesses. I had arranged chairs in a conference room setup, rather than the cozy living room atmosphere of our previous encounter. Before we discuss anything else, I began, I need complete honesty about what really happened 18 years ago. Not the sanitized version, not the excuses about financial hardship, but the actual truth about why you chose to keep 2 children and discard the third. My parents exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Finally, my father took a deep breath and began speaking in a defeated tone. The truth is that the divorce was messier than we told you kids. Your mother and I were both having affairs, and the custody battle was getting ugly. Marcus was from my first marriage, so keeping him with me was non-negotiable for legal reasons. Melody was young enough that she needed her mother, and Patricia fought hard to keep her. He paused, struggling to continue with the most damaging part of their story. You were caught in the middle, and honestly, we were both so focused on hurting each other and protecting our own interests that we convinced ourselves you would be better off somewhere else. We told ourselves we were doing what was best for you, but really we were just taking the path that caused us the least complications. The admission was both validating and devastating. After 18 years, I finally had confirmation that my worst fears were true. I had been sacrificed for their convenience, discarded, because keeping me would have required them to put my needs above their own drama and selfishness. My mother's face was flushed with shame, but she added her own confession. We also thought you were old enough to understand and adapt while the younger children needed more stability. We figured you were resilient and would land on your feet wherever you ended up. So you gambled with a 10-year-old child's entire future because it was easier than being responsible parents, David said bluntly. You abandoned her to protect yourselves from inconvenience. The stark summary of their actions hung in the air like an indictment. Sarah took notes while maintaining her professional demeanor, but I could see the disgust in her eyes as she listened to their explanations. And in 18 years, I continued, neither of you ever wondered how that abandoned 10-year-old was doing, never felt curious about whether your gamble had paid off, or whether you had destroyed an innocent child's life for your own convenience. We thought about you, Melody said, quietly speaking for the first time during this meeting. I asked about you sometimes when I was younger, but Mom and Dad always said you were fine and that contacting you would just confuse everyone. They told you I was fine without ever checking on my well-being, I replied. That should have been your first clue that something was wrong with their story. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat before adding his own revelation. I always felt guilty about it. Even as a kid, I knew something was not right about the whole situation, but I was scared that if I asked too many questions, they might decide I was too much trouble too. The admission that even my siblings had sensed the wrongness of the situation, but had stayed silent to protect themselves, added another layer of betrayal to the already devastating revelation. So now we come to the present situation, I said, consulting my notes. Marcus, you need expensive medical treatment. Your parents could liquidate assets to pay for it, but that would require financial sacrifice they prefer to avoid. So they tracked me down, hoping that blood ties and guilt would motivate me to solve their problem without cost to themselves. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard in the conference room, beginning to outline the stark reality of their request. Let me break this down clearly. You want me, the child you abandoned for your convenience, to provide $200,000 to save the child you chose to keep. You want me to demonstrate the family loyalty you never showed me, to prioritize the well-being of people who explicitly excluded me from their family. The mathematical absurdity of their expectations became clear when laid out so directly. They were asking me to be the family member to Marcus that they had never been to me. Here is what I have decided, I announced, turning back to face them directly. I will pay for Marcus's medical treatment in full, but with conditions that are non-negotiable. Relief flooded their faces, but I held up my hand to stop any premature celebrations. First, this payment comes with a legal agreement that this is the final financial interaction between us. You will never contact me again for money assistance or any other purpose. Second, you will each write detailed letters of apology, acknowledging the specific harm you caused and taking full responsibility for your choices. These letters will be reviewed by a therapist and must demonstrate genuine understanding of the impact of your actions. Their expressions shifted from relief to uncertainty, as they realized this would not be a simple transaction. Third, you will make substantial donations to foster care organizations in your local area, and you will volunteer your time helping children who are experiencing what you put me through. You will do this for at least 2 years, and you will think about me every time you interact with an abandoned child. The conditions were designed not just to help Marcus, but to force them to confront the reality of what they had done and to channel their guilt into something productive for other vulnerable children. Finally, I concluded you will explain to your extended family, friends, and community exactly what you did to me and why you now need financial help from the daughter you abandoned. No more sanitized versions or convenient omissions. You will tell the truth about your choices and face the social consequences of your actions. The room fell silent as they absorbed the full scope of my requirements. I was offering them what they needed, but I was also ensuring that they would pay a real price for their past decisions and current desperation. These are the terms, I said firmly. Take them, or find another way to pay for Marcus's treatment. You have 24 hours to decide. The next 24 hours revealed more about my biological family's character than the previous 18 years of absence had. Rather than taking time to consider my offer thoughtfully, they immediately began a campaign to pressure me into accepting more favorable terms. My mother called within 2 hours of leaving my office, her voice alternating between fake sweetness and barely contained anger. Delphine, honey, those conditions are really harsh. We understand you are hurt, but Marcus is dying, and this is not the time for punishment and revenge. Can we not just handle the medical bills and work out the emotional stuff later? The transparent attempt to separate the financial assistance from accountability was exactly what I had expected. They wanted the benefits of family connection without any of the responsibilities or consequences that came with their past choices. The offer stands as presented, I replied calmly. Medical treatment and accountability come as a package deal. You do not get to cherry-pick which parts of my proposal you find acceptable. Next came Marcus himself, calling with a voice, weak from treatment, but strong with desperation. Delphine, please, I know what they did was wrong, but I was just a kid too. I did not make the decision to send you away. Why should I suffer for their mistakes? The emotional manipulation was sophisticated but transparent. Marcus was presenting himself as an innocent victim of circumstances beyond his control, hoping to guilt me into providing assistance without requiring anything from our parents. Marcus, you are not being punished, I explained patiently. The medical treatment will be paid for regardless of whether our parents meet my conditions. But they have to choose between maintaining their pride and saving your life. That is a choice they have to make, not me. The distinction was important. I was not withholding medical care based on their compliance, but I was requiring them to face consequences if they wanted my financial assistance. They could find other ways to pay for treatment if my terms were unacceptable. Melody's approach was different but equally manipulative. She showed up at my office, unannounced, tears streaming down her face, claiming she had always missed me and regretted not fighting harder to stay in touch. The sudden sisterly affection after 18 years of silence was both pathetic and insulting. I was just a little girl when it happened, she sobbed dramatically. I did not understand what was really going on, and by the time I was old enough to reach out, so much time had passed that I did not know how to bridge the gap. The explanation was convenient but inconsistent with her earlier admission that she had asked about me and been told I was fine. She was now claiming ignorance and powerlessness to avoid taking any responsibility for the years of silence. Melody, you are 26 years old, I replied matter-of-factly. You have been an adult for 8 years. If you genuinely wanted contact with me, you could have made that happen at any point. The fact that you are here now asking for money, rather than relationship, tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. By the evening of their deadline, my father made one final attempt at negotiation. He arrived at my house with a different strategy, aggressive intimidation rather than emotional manipulation. You think you are so much better than us now with your fancy house and your perfect life, he said angrily. But you are still our daughter, and you owe us respect and loyalty whether you like it or not. This whole revenge fantasy of yours is sick, and if Marcus dies because of your stubbornness, That blood will be on your hands. The attempt to shame me into compliance while simultaneously claiming parental authority was breathtakingly hypocritical. David stepped forward, his own anger finally showing. "You forfeited any parental authority the day you abandoned her," he said firmly. "You do not get to show up 18 years later demanding loyalty and respect that you never earned. You are guests in our home and you will treat my wife with courtesy, or you will leave immediately." My father backed down quickly, realizing that his intimidation tactics were not going to work on adults who would not tolerate his behavior. But his true colors had been revealed. When manipulation failed, he defaulted to bullying and threats. The deadline passed without acceptance of my terms. Instead, I received a group text message that revealed the full extent of their entitlement and self-delusion. "Delphine, we have decided that your conditions are unreasonable and punitive. We are disappointed that you would use Marcus's illness to settle old scores, instead of just helping family in need. We will find another way to handle the medical bills, but we want you to know that your selfishness is destroying any chance of rebuilding our family relationship." The message was a masterpiece of projection and manipulation. They were accusing me of selfishness while refusing to take accountability for their own actions. They were claiming I was destroying family relationships that they had already destroyed 18 years earlier. Most tellingly, they were walking away from financial assistance for Marcus, rather than meeting conditions that would require them to face consequences for their choices. Within hours of rejecting my offer, however, their tune began to change dramatically. My attorney friend Sarah had been monitoring their social media accounts and discovered that my parents had been seeking loans, running crowdfunding campaigns, and reaching out to extended family members for financial assistance. None of these efforts had been successful. Marcus's condition was deteriorating and the window for optimal treatment was closing rapidly. The private investigator they had hired to find me had apparently cost much more than they had initially admitted, depleting savings they had claimed not to have. Their backs were truly against the wall. My mother's second call came at midnight, her voice broken and desperate. "Delphine, please, we will do whatever you want. The letters, the volunteering, the donations, everything. We will accept all your conditions. Just please do not let Marcus die, because we were too proud to admit we were wrong." The complete capitulation was both satisfying and somewhat anticlimactic. All their bluster and manipulation had crumbled the moment they realized I was their only viable option, and that I was serious about my requirements. "The offer expires in 1 hour," I replied calmly. "If you want to accept my conditions, you need to come to my attorney's office right now and sign the legal agreements. No more delays, no more negotiations, no more attempts to modify the terms." As I hung up the phone, David wrapped his arms around me from behind. "How are you feeling about all this?" he asked gently. "Like justice is finally being served," I replied honestly. "They are about to learn that actions have consequences even after 18 years of avoiding them." The legal agreements were signed at 2 in the morning in Sarah's law office. My biological parents looked defeated and exhausted as they put their signatures on documents that would hold them accountable for their past actions and require genuine change moving forward. Marcus's treatment began the next day, funded by my payment but governed by conditions that would transform how their family operated. The letters of apology arrived 3 weeks later, each one reviewed and approved by a licensed therapist before being delivered to me. Reading them was both validating and emotionally draining. For the first time in my life, I had written acknowledgement of the specific ways their choices had harmed me. My father's letter was clinical and detailed. I abandoned my parental responsibilities to Delphine because it was easier than dealing with the complications of shared custody. I prioritized my own convenience over her well-being and chose to believe she would be fine without ever verifying that belief. I failed as a father and as a human being. My mother's letter was more emotional but equally honest. I told myself I was protecting Melody by keeping her close, but really, I was just protecting myself from the guilt of what we were doing to Delphine. I chose to forget about her, rather than fight for her, because fighting would have been harder than pretending she did not exist. Marcus and Melody also submitted letters taking responsibility for their years of silence and acknowledging that they had benefited from my exclusion while doing nothing to challenge it or reach out independently. The most surprising development came 6 months later, when I received a call from a social worker at the local Department of Children and Family Services. My biological parents had not only met their volunteer requirements, but had become passionate advocates for foster children. They were requesting training to become emergency foster parents themselves. They specifically mentioned wanting to help older children who age out of the system, the social worker explained. They said they understand now what those kids go through and want to be part of the solution. The transformation seemed almost too good to be true, but multiple sources confirmed that their commitment was genuine and sustained. They had sold their vacation cabin to make the required charitable donations and had reorganized their entire lifestyle around volunteer work and foster care preparation. Marcus's treatment was successful, and he achieved remission after 8 months of intensive therapy. Throughout his recovery, he sent me regular updates and expressions of gratitude, never once asking for additional assistance or trying to leverage his illness for further benefit. More importantly, he began attending therapy to process his own trauma from growing up in a family system that had taught him his value was conditional on being chosen over his sister. The realization that he could easily have been the discarded child under different circumstances had shaken him profoundly. Melody took a different path toward accountability, enrolling in social work, school, and specializing in family preservation services. She wanted to help families stay together in healthy ways, rather than making the destructive choices her parents had made. I realized I spent my whole childhood being grateful. I was not you, she wrote in one of her periodic updates. That is a terrible way to build self-worth, and it took me way too long to understand that what happened to you was wrong, not lucky for me. The most significant change in my own life was not the vindication or the financial resolution, but the way the experience had deepened my relationships with my chosen family. David and I grew closer through navigating the crisis together. The Hendersons became even more precious to me as I was reminded of what real parental love looked like. We also decided to expand our own family through adoption, specifically choosing to adopt siblings from foster care who were at risk of being separated. 10-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan, joined our household 8 months after Marcus's treatment concluded. We want to make sure they never feel like they have to choose between each other or wonder if they are wanted, David explained to the adoption caseworker. Family means keeping people together, not throwing them away when things get complicated. The children thrived in an environment where love was unconditional and consistent. Watching them blossom reminded me daily of what I had missed as a child, but also of how far I had come despite those losses. My biological family kept every commitment they had made. The volunteer work continued long past the required 2 years. The therapy sessions became an ongoing part of their lives, rather than a temporary obligation. The financial boundaries were respected without any attempts at renegotiation or manipulation. Most importantly, they never again contacted me seeking relationship or reconciliation beyond the structured accountability measures we had agreed upon. They seemed to understand that forgiveness did not require forgetting and that making amends did not entitle them to renewed access to my life. 3 years after that midnight confrontation in Sarah's office, I received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a photo album documenting my biological family's volunteer work with foster children, along with a simple note: "We cannot undo what we did to you, but we can try to make sure other children do not experience what you went through. Thank you for forcing us to become better people. We hope you are proud of the family you built and the life you created despite our failures." The gesture was touching and appropriate. Acknowledgement without expectation, accountability without demand for forgiveness. They had learned to make amends without making it about their own emotional needs. Looking at photos of my father reading bedtime stories to foster children and my mother helping teenagers prepare for independent living, I felt something I had never expected: genuine pride in who they had become. Not because they were my biological family, but because they had chosen to transform their guilt into meaningful service for vulnerable children. That evening, as David and I tucked Emma and Ethan into bed and listened to their excited chatter about school and friends, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us all together. My biological family's abandonment had been devastating, but it had also taught me to choose family based on love and commitment rather than genetics and convenience. Sometimes, the greatest gift is being forced to build something better than what you lost. My biological family had broken the cycle of abandonment through accountability and service. I had broken it through choosing love over resentment and building the family I had always deserved. The 10-year-old girl who had been deemed expendable had grown up to become someone who understood that every child deserves to be chosen, valued, and kept safe. That knowledge had become my life's mission and my greatest source of meaning. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that forced you to choose between bitterness and growth? Have you found that sometimes the most unexpected justice comes not from revenge, but from forcing people to face the truth about themselves? I would love to hear your thoughts about second chances, accountability, and what really makes a family in the comments below. If this story of karma, justice, and chosen family resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family drama and building the life you deserve. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that blood does not always make family, but love and consistency always do. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes being discarded is just the universe making room for something better to find you.